have made it to the end of June. It's going to be July already next week. That's crazy. So, what a better way to spend the end of June, halfway through the year, with doing a mid-year safety and compliance recap. So if you have attended any of our webinars through the years, this may be a little bit of, a review for you, but it's always good to hear things a second time around to make sure that we are not missing any information that we've gone over, and just as a good reminder. So what did we talk about through the beginning of this year? We'll go ahead and get started. So I first want to just go over some of the things that have been happening this year in the industry, and not so recently, but more recently in the last like 5 or 6 years. There's been a lot of things going on, a lot of new regulations, a lot of new discoveries that people are finding that are some safety gaps within the industry that are causing new regulations to come out. It seems like every week there's something new. These are some of the top ones, with the ELP mandates, with the new modus release that has kind of been a little unstable to say the least. A lot of chatter around the non-domiciled CDLs, and one that's not on here specifically was the change in if there is an accident that a broker can be liable for hiring a driver or putting out a load that is, not a safe driver. And then the electronic medical card mandate that also occurred, CSA, SMS system changes. I mean, there's been a lot of changes this year, and it's only June, so I can only imagine what's coming forward. So these are just some of the things. If you're not aware of what's going on, this is a good list to kind of take a look at and maybe do a little research, read a blog, watch our previous webinars where we talk a little bit more about them, but it really just sets the stage of there's been a lot going on. So how do we kind of conquer this, right? So in January, we partnered with Lifesaver Mobile about building a unified safety stack. We talked really heavily about how distracted driving is now really a core safety pillar. And if you don't have a way to detect, detect distracted driving specifically with cell phone usage, and you don't have a way to kind of mitigate that risk, it's really putting your fleet at a really high level of risk. Cell phone distraction is like one of the one of the biggest indicators of crashes, of accidents, of citations, of just unsafe behavior. So it's really something that you should be tracking with your fleet. We also, cameras typically are the kind of go-to for monitoring driver behavior, whether that's in cab or just forward facing. But sometimes, and through studies that Lifesaver has done with some clients, they've shown that cameras might not be the right solution for you. So that's where traditional safety technology can kind of fall short. We showed, that there's also this fear of like a big brother effect, why are you watching me in the cab while I'm driving? And how to really show that we're trying to help you as a driver, instead of, just sitting there watching cameras all day. We all don't have time for that. So, with the cell phone tracking in particular, there's other things out there that might not be what traditional tech with like the cameras, or the ELDs tracking like harsh braking and stuff like that can really be more beneficial, more cost effective towards this distracted driving like epidemic that we're having with our drivers with the cell phone, the addiction that cell phones really hold with just the psychology behind it. And there's a way to be more preventative towards cell phone usage instead of reactive after the fact. We also really talked about why integrations matter. It's really hard to manage a problem when you are managing that problem in 5, 6, 7 different platforms. So you want to make sure that your safety stack, your technology safety stack, really specifically speaking, is integrated together. There is some kind of cohesive, marrying of the systems. They talk to each other. There's a very easy way for you to get all that information in one spot, and it's giving you the analytics that you need to prevent the behaviors or give you the insight of, okay, what's going on? How do I address this? It really does play a big part on not just your safety scores, your fleet. Good driving behaviors have shown to be more cost effective towards your maintenance programs as well. If they're not harsh braking, if they are not speeding, your fuel cost goes down. There's a lot that goes into driving behavior other than they're not flipping the car or flipping the truck on the side of the road. It also plays into insurance. Insurance now is really looking at the companies who are going above and beyond, and it's really affecting their rates and their ability to fight litigation if it comes to something like that. Um, in February, we talked about fuel tax reporting, fun stuff, IFTA, and we talked a lot about, bad data equals gaps in your reporting. So mileage tracking, fuel receipts, and internal processes are some of the big areas, the top three areas specifically that we see time and time again that there are gaps and it's causing issues with your fuel tax reporting. Now, if you don't cross state lines, you don't have to deal with fuel tax reporting. But for those who do, which a lot of majority of people do, this is going to be a big burden on your company. It takes a whole lot of time throughout the end of the month, end of the quarter to file your FTR. So how do we plan for the future? We really talked about improving data consistently, or consistency across systems. Again, going back to the integration side of things, how do you um, make sure that your systems are talking to each other in a way that's going to give you the data that you need? We talked about, reports, fleet should run, records to organize and retains, when it may be time to, change how your fuel tax is managed and like what those red flags are that might signify that. We just for kind of a brief overview of some of the red flags is missing or incomplete fuel receipts. If you're coming across those time and time again, it's probably time, to look into a different way of managing your fuel receipts, your mileage, and stuff like that. Mileage reported without supporting trip data. Again, if your systems aren't talking to each other, this could lead for gaps with the evidence that you need to back up your filings. If you're finding unusually high or low miles per gallon averages, this is really typical if for whatever reason you can lose service with however you're tracking your miles and stuff like that. Jurisdiction miles that don't match fuel activity, manual overrides, last minute data fixes. These are all kind of red flags that you could be looking out for while you're doing your fuel tax reporting. And I just want to note that everything that we're kind of going through at a higher speed. This is just a very big overview of everything we've talked through the months. All of these webinars that are, in full, speaking of topics, are available on our website, but these are just going to be the highlights of this year to kind of give you guys a good checkpoint to go back and see, maybe I forgot about that, or maybe I should go watch that full webinar. These are some recommended tools specifically for fuel tax reporting. Gateway Connect, it can show you where there's gaps, like, hey, this driver really transported from California to Texas. Probably not. There's some states in between there. Shows you a nice visual that there's some missing data. In March, we talked about the top 5 things to guarantee meeting fleet safety standards. One is finding technology that fits. Again, we talked about this in January. This is a really big topic that a lot of companies or a lot of fleet managers, they have been in the industry for a really long time, or they have a buddy who was in the industry for a really long time, or they've just used a previous piece of technology or software or something at a previous job. And so that's just what they know. That's just what they want to implement. but the fleet can be completely different. The way that you operate could be completely different. And times are changing, new technologies coming out, things are being updated. There's a whole world out there that some people might not know about. So you want to make sure that the technology that you're implementing is right for your fleet, for your goals, for your gaps that you're trying to fill. You want to make sure you're doing your research and really implementing things that are going to work specifically for you, for your fleet, that just makes sense. Um, the other thing that fleets that are doing that are, going above the safety standard is they have a really high or a really strong onboarding process. Onboarding specifically with drivers, that is the first checkpoint that you're going to know that this driver has good safety behaviors. That's the first touch. That is from the very beginning. You are going to be DOT compliant. You are checking that that driver is not going to cause a bunch of points on your CSA score. They're not going to be a huge headache for you. That you need to have a strong, clear onboarding process with a DOT compliant application, making sure you're doing all your checks and balances, your MVRs, your clearinghouse queries, your employment or safety verifications. You are having them do the drug and alcohol testing. It's not just a compliance thing, it is a safety thing as well to have strong onboarding. You want to have consistent checks and balances across the board here, specifically with drivers, checks and balances for onboarding. So making sure that it's a clear process. Everyone who's involved is on the same page and things are being done in the way that they're supposed to be getting done. And then also throughout the life cycle of that driver, how are you tracking renewals? There are driver's license renewals, there are TWIC card, there are hazmat, there are annual MVRs that are coming due. How are you doing your annual clearinghouses? You got to make sure that there's checks and balances, things are being checked, things are being managed, and you could argue, the driver's license, well, that's the driver's responsibility. They need to get that done. Yeah, but they're driving under your DOT. They are operating under your authority, and you're going to get dinged as well if that driver does not have a license that's valid, it's been suspended. It's not only going to give you a ding, it's going to potentially park that vehicle depending on what the problem is, right? Park that vehicle. Now you have to send someone out to go get that load. You're now delayed in your load. The customer is unhappy. It's causes, there's a ripple effect here, right? So checks and balances with things that you might not feel are your responsibility as a safety or fleet manager, they are. Preventative maintenance, this is a big thing, big topic right now, which we talked about last month. We'll get into a little bit more about preventative maintenance, but just having a preventative maintenance system in place is going to, in the long run, keep your productivity up. It's going to keep your maintenance fees down, and it's overall just really beneficial for fleets to kind of go in that direction. And then the last thing is ongoing education, which is what we're doing today. Listening to webinars, being involved in industries, going to conventions or conferences, which are super fun. If you haven't been to one, highly recommend trying to go to a conference. They're really fun, educational. You learn a lot. You meet a lot of cool people. You get involved on LinkedIn with them. You see what their struggles are. It sparks, hey, I didn't even know that was going on. Being involved in having some type of education source or news source that you trust and follow is a really good habit to have, not just in work life, but also outside of that as well. So we talked about where fleet maintenance and compliance breaks down, specifically more going back on the SMS, CSA severity changes, the two different categories for maintenance in particular. And then we also dived into, what is causing these issues. So missed inspections. they are just not completed. People are pencil whipping. There's a lack of training is also an issue. They just don't know that they're supposed to be completing these things in full, or they feel like it's not, they don't understand the reason behind it, right? Maybe it's not necessarily they don't know how to do it. It's more of a communication of, well, why am I doing this, right? Some people, if they don't understand the why, they don't proceed with the full enacting out the full doing it essentially, right? And then lost or never reaches mechanics, that's a big one, right? Again, if you are still doing this on paper, if you don't have a good way of communicating between driver, safety manager, fleet manager, your mechanic, there's a lot of people involved that could potentially be involved in that. There's some high potential that the mechanic just never realizes that something needs to get fixed. Unresolved defects, again, this can go back to the lost or never reaches the mechanic for the inspections. Excuse me. So either there's a couple things, right? Either it was completely ignored, the mechanic just doesn't do it, the safety manager doesn't feel like it needs to be passed on to the mechanic. There's a lot of reasons why it can be ignored. Or if it was fixed, it wasn't tracked that it was fixed, or it wasn't tracked that it needed to be done. And then you can also determine it's not safety impacting, but it wasn't signed off. So you have no trail that, hey, we checked this, we saw that it was okay, it was signed off by the mechanic, it was signed off by, safety, whoever needs to be involved in that. And you just have no record, right? You have to keep records of that. And then the review gap, right? Drivers fail to sign off on the prior repair, and then that is the most commonly missed thing. All these stats came from our partner from Whip Around, who deals specifically with DVARs and preventative maintenance for fleets. They did a wonderful webinar going really, really deep into preventative maintenance and DVIRs specifically. Um, More, kind of going into like proactive versus reactive maintenance specifically. So fleets that adopt a proactive maintenance strategy consistently outperform those that react to problems after they occur. So like I mentioned before, it reduces unexpected breakdowns if you have a preventative maintenance schedule in place. You're catching things before they can become bigger problems. It can improve your vehicle lifespan, just like your own personal vehicle. You take it in at every 10,000, 20,000 miles. They do a check on it. They make sure nothing's leaking, your tires are good, you rotate them, you get your oil change, all that stuff that you do with your personal vehicles needs to be done with your fleet vehicles, probably at a larger scale. They're working overtime more than your personal vehicle. So it improves that lifespan, right? Maintain your audit ready records, and then lowers your long-term operational costs. If you let something linger for longer, it's going to potentially cause more problems. Um, And then we talked about specifically what a chameleon driver is. This is a really big thing that has come out recently in the industry about drivers and companies specifically that will operate very unsafely, operate without, not, regulations are not in mind. It is get the cargo, move it fast. We don't care how you do it. Turn off your miles, go over hours of service. We don't care. Get it done. They start, racking up issues, and then they shut themselves down, and then they just open up another company, different DOT number, same drivers, same operations, same everything, and they just do it all over again, right? So there are some things that were released and are coming with the FMCSA to kind of prevent this from happening, but there's going to be loopholes. I mean, people get past it if they really want to. So with that comes chameleon drivers, or these drivers who were taught bad habits. They were operating with these chameleon carriers. And how do you spot that to make sure that they don't fall into your fleet? Now, there are things in place with the FMCSA if you're following regulations for like onboarding, right? Their MVR will tell you a lot. Their clearinghouse potentially might tell you. If you're doing your safety checks from previous employers, and you consistently find out that the employer that they put down is out of service or is no longer operating, potential red flag. There are some things that have been put into place that could help you catch that. However, people can write fake information down. They could falsify records. It does happen. And if, for whatever reason, everything kind of checks out, you did your part, and for God forbid that driver gets into an accident that has a fatality or causes a huge, a case on you, you have evidence that you did what you needed to do on your end, to kind of protect you, protect the company and your fleet and everything like that. So I just want to make sure that we are, on the lookout for that. Here are some of the things, that just because it's a requirement from the FMCSA, there are hidden gaps potentially that could be falsified or used against you. So your application, there can be employment gaps, even though it's a DOT requirement. Your MBR, if there's unreported incidents, sometimes that does happen. Or if you're only doing an MBR once a year per the regulation, that's 364 days of a blind spot there. You don't know what's going on with that driver. Their license could get suspended and you have no idea. Clearinghouse query, they could have an unreported positive, or if they don't have a CDL, then you can't necessarily check that information, especially with not so much now because the clearinghouse is definitely matured, it's older, and it seems to be working well. But back when it first started, specifically, and things were down, people couldn't make accounts. It kept glitching out. You had to clear it out and then wait for the FMCSA to clear out your account and then make a new one. There's a lot of glitches on the user interface, and I can't imagine what was going on behind the scenes with the MROs and everything like that, having to report that information. Drug and alcohol, that's an easy one to kind of falsify with a temporary clean, or some people do some crazy measures to to falsify positive test results. And then your previous employment safety checks, right? If they just don't put the employment information down, or if you're a database ping with like a AI kind of ping database, which a lot of background check companies use, that could cause some issues if they are just pinging for the information, and then it just can't find anything and says, yep, no record. Well, that doesn't really give you a whole lot of information, right? So you want to try to do a little bit more, to make sure that you're, doing your part and getting the information that you need. Again, kind of just going into the chameleon carriers I kind of started talking about this a little bit already, but what you can do as a carrier. So application, you want to make sure you're doing your gap reconciliations, and your verifications. So past licenses, drug and alcohol questionnaire, making sure that they don't have another active license, getting that checked from the driver to confirm that you're asking them for this information. Previous employer checks, so true contact attempts, again, limit those AI database pings. And the background check provider you're using, you might not even know that's what they're doing. So you might want to check into that. We partner with EvoCon. They don't do that. They are on the phone, emails, sending mail. They will get in contact with someone and speak to a representative at that company. Behavior tracking, so proactive safety analytics, make sure that you are tracking behaviors, not just accidents, citations, things that are actually formally on a piece of paper, but other things with your ELD, cell phone usage, harsh braking, things from your ELD, even behaviors outside of just driving behaviors can be a big indicator of someone's safety protocols, the way that they potentially may their work ethic, stuff like that. If they're causing a lot of issues with customers specifically, if they have a customer facing role, that could, cause issues as well. Road test. So despite that regulation flexibility of having a CDL, we always recommend doing a road test pre-hire. It just gives you a quick, like, yeah, he knows what he's doing, she knows what she's doing, or now they cannot drive this vehicle. There, I will not trust them with my 80,000 pound vehicle. And then continuous MBR monitoring. So incidents outside of hours of service, this is a huge thing too. If they're in their personal vehicle, they're not being tracked by your camera. They're not being tracked by your ELD GPS. They're not being monitored under your DOT. So how do you know if they get their license suspended over the weekend for reckless driving, DUI, something like that, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing that continuous monitoring. So a quick recap of everything that we talked about up until this point during this webinar is we learned how to proactive safety technology can reduce distracted driving, prevent accidents, and improve driver behavior. We identified costly data gaps and reporting errors. We discovered practical strategies to strengthen safety culture and reduce risk, improve vehicle reliability, reduce violations, and catch maintenance issues before they become costly, and learn how hidden driver risks enter your fleet and the processes needed to identify issues before they impact safety and compliance. So we covered a lot this year already. Three main themes. I know we're pushing up on time, so if you guys got to drop, totally understand, but thanks for joining us. If you can stay over and feel like this information is helpful, feel free to stay on. Love to have you guys here. But three main themes that are throughout all of our webinars, really with everything we talk about, is safety is built. It's not assumed. You have to find the technology. You have to find the software. You have to find the drivers and the fleet and the managers, and you have to build that safety culture. It's not going to be assumed that your fleet is operating in a safe manner. Gaps are easier to fix early. Prevention over reaction all day, every day, time and time again. It shows that a preventative outlook on any type of driver safety, fleet safety, maintenance, dispatch, anything, trying preventative approach is much better. The right system to support better decisions. Again, kind of going back into that theme of you got to make sure that you are using the technology that is for your fleet, for your safety goals, for your compliance goals, and for the gaps that you are trying to solve. You want to make sure that it's giving you the data that you need, it's giving you the data in the way that you need it, so you can actually make those informed decisions. Three things that you can do today. I always like to leave these webinars with giving you something that you could potentially do walking away from here. So review your current safety process. Just go in and look at what you're doing today. Try to identify at least one gap. There potentially may be one, and there's a high chance there is one, even if it's very small. And then explore that technology. Find the technology that's going to work for your budget, your goal. It's going to hone in on that gap or the gaps. One piece of technology can fix multiple that you're trying to fix. These are some recommended tools for driver qualification and asset management or fuel tax reporting, specifically DQM and GWC. These are great tools. We've built them in-house that you can utilize in your everyday operations. So that is our safety recap. We talked about a lot today. And if you are interested in any of the topics that we went over and want to learn a little bit more or recap on those topics specifically, all of our webinars are on our website, dqmconnect.com. under driving success webinar. So feel free to rewatch those. If you're like me and need background noise while you work, they're great to have on, just to kind of have in the background, and you can listen and work at the same time. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know we went a little over time, but we had a lot of good things to talk about. So thank you so much for joining me. Stay safe, stay compliant, and keep driving success. Thank